So for this video, we've come to a rather sleepy, overgrown graveyard in order to just have a few brief words about this man, James Stephen. So why come out all the way to the far north of London, into Stoke Newington? Well, it's for this guy, James Stephens, and what's important about him is that he was the chief architect of the Slave Trade Act, so the abolition of the slave trade. It was passed through Parliament in 1807, and this man was the legal brains behind that. Now, of course, he wasn't acting alone, he was acting as a team, and the more famous part of the abolition of slavery in the UK, which had enormous implications for the whole slave trade, was a guy called William Wilberforce. So Wilberforce, if you like, was the man with the microphone. He was the guy with the charisma, the guy who could stand up and hold an audience. But it needed somebody to do the legal work behind all of that. So this is who this guy is. So small teams really can make a difference. And in any school, there's clusters of students who really have either a vision or a passion or the skills to do things that can create legacy. And those skills range from music to public speaking, to managing, to writing, to art, to all sorts, right across the spectrum. And the beautiful thing is that supporting this idea that small clusters of people can make a big difference, the political scientist Eric Chenoweth had identified in her historical survey of all the major social revolutions in history that you only ever need 3.5% of a population to fully engage with something in order to make a massive difference. And that's true of things like the civil rights movement. And it's also, of course, true for the abolition of slavery. Now, these graves are even older, and the point about pointing these people out is that when they were alive, the idea that you could abolish slavery would have been a nonsense. When you have a status quo, it seems immovable, especially for something which had such enormous economic advantage for the UK. So by abolishing the slave trade, it's easy to forget that it was extremely inconvenient to do that. So one final shout out for Manchester before we leave. In the UK then, slavery was abolished in 1807, but it carried on in America until the 1860s, until the Civil War. So the southern states of America, especially exporting cotton, which had been farmed by slavery. And the people in Manchester in the 1860s simply refused to take it. So they went on strike. And millions of people did this, both factory workers and factory owners. So that was an extraordinary gesture, or more than a gesture, of making an economic sacrifice for a moral cause. And it had a big impact. So here we have some, let's say, unknown people from the past, but there is a tremendous power in collective action. I think the problem is that, unlike the slave trade, the climate crisis is much too abstract for people to really imagine the injustices. So one of our jobs as teachers is to bring to the surface the systems injustices which will play out on a very visceral level, on a very violent level for millions of people. And until we really have that clear in the imagination of the students and of course the wider imagination of the public, then climate change is always going to, in a sense, be on the back foot. It's always going to seem like some kind of fringe issue. So it's an important task of the students to not make climate change into some sort of, reduce it to some small individual actions or small individual problems, but to see it as a systems problem that requires a systems mobilization.